Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is One Piece Arabasta Saga, Reverse Mountain Arc, Episode 62. The first obstacle, Giant Whale Laboon appears. Episode in a nutshell is a brief reminder of what happens in the episode. So in this episode, they are coming down Reverse Mountain. And at first everything is misted, but then they start to hear this howling noise. And as the mist starts to thin out as they get closer to the bottom of the mountain, they see a giant black wall in front of them, which turns out to be a whale. And because their rudder is broken, they can't steer around the whale. So in the end, Luffy has the clever idea to use the cannon as a way to slow their momentum. So he shoots a cannonball at the whale, which does slow their momentum, but unfortunately, they still do crash into the whale, which does send Luffy's special seat. Um, well, it breaks Luffy's special seat. It sends the head flying back towards the center of the ship, and this, of course, makes Luffy angry. So while the rest are trying to steer around the whale and get away from it, Luffy, as they're coming up beside its eyeball, decides to be angry about his seat and punches it in the eye. This, of course, enrages it. The ship ends up swallowed. Luffy, however, decides he's not going to die, so he uses his stretching powers to get on top of the whale. But then the whale starts to sink under as he's screaming at it to give him his friends back. And so he then notices that there's a door in the whale. And he goes inside of the whale through these hallways and eventually runs into Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine. Meanwhile, the crew is in the stomach. They meet Crocus, who basically is considering Laboon's stomach his private resort because he is the doctor that takes care of Laboon. And Laboon, it is hinted at that he has a tragic backstory and that he's devotedly been waiting for a certain pirate crew for 50 years. And the reason that he has all the scars on his head is because he keeps hitting his head against the red line, trying to get to this crew. And the reason that he stands up and howls at the sky is also his grief while waiting for this crew. And because of his. So Crocus has built all this infrastructure, and we do see him as he starts hitting himself. Crocus swims over and goes and sticks a needle in that has some sedative in it to stop Laboon from hurting himself. Luffy and the others, because of all the swishing around from hitting the red line, end up kind of bursting through the doors. And they do save Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine, but when they find out that they're hunters, Luffy ends up knocking them out, saying he just doesn't like them. And then the crew go over to Crocus's island ship, and he then prepares to tell them the story of Laboon. And that's what happens. So now that we've been reminded about what happened in the episode, we will now rank the episode. First on our mostly objective ranking list, which uses set values to determine the score, and while emotion is not present, bias and judgment can still apply. And then the personal ranking, which is the emotion ranking that uses entertainment value and my own personal opinion. So on our mostly objective ranking list, we have 1 point for Laboon. Now, typically what I consider is if it is an animal character that cannot speak human language, so obviously if it can speak human language or a minx, chopper, etc., I will count them as regular characters, but if they are an animal that cannot speak, I just give them the lowest amount of points possible, even if they are a major part of the arc, because they are only an animal. They aren't a full character, and so they'll always be in the 1 point column, which is why Laboon is here, even though it could be argued he is a main character of this arc. He is still just a whale, so he gets 1 point. Then we have our single arc main character introduction, which is Crocus. Then we have our multi-arc supporting character introduction for 3 points, which is Mr. Nine, as he's in this arc and the next one. And then we have a multi-arc main character introduction, which is Miss Wednesday. And because this is a rewatch, because it is so old, if this is a spoiler to you, I'm shocked. But Nefertari Vivi, who is basically a main character throughout this saga before being demoted into more of a supporting character that we see every so often in like flashes of what's she up to now sort of things, is Vivi. So because she is a main character in pretty much the majority of the arcs for the remainder of this saga, I am counting her as a multi-arc main character, even though she's not a member of the crew, which what was my original plan for the multi-arc main characters to be the members of the Straw Hat crew, but because she does join the crew for an extended period of time this entire saga, again, I'm counting her there, because there are other exceptions in the future as well of people who join the crew for an extended period of time but aren't necessarily a part of the crew. Um, Anyways, that's my justification for why she's there, and that's worth 4 points, which brings us up to 10. However, I did want to add in the negative messaging or behavior, which of course is the animal cruelty. I mean, it didn't seem to faze him, but they still shot a cannon at Laboon, which was rude, and then Luffy did punch him in the eye. Um, so, and I mean, technically, Crocus has built an entire infrastructure within the whale. However, he did that to heal the whale, so I'm not counting it towards the animal cruelty. But the point is, Luffy shot a cannon at him and punched him in the eyeball, which I just think is cruel. So, minus 2 points for that. That leaves us at an 8 out of 10. And this is the first episode of the arc, so it is in first place. The first obstacle, Giant Whale Laboon appears. And then we have my personal ranking for this episode. And I enjoyed the comedic aspects. There was a lot of action at the start of the episode with them coming down this mountain at an uncontrollable speed, then facing a wall. I do think that the cannon to slow the momentum was a clever idea. I just wish it wasn't a living creature that the cannon was shot at. Luckily, the island whale is large enough that it did not even seem to faze him, which is at least decent. And then, to a certain extent, I feel like Luffy's anger at his special seat was a little bit extreme, since it could be argued it was both their faults, because really Laboon had no idea they were coming down the mountain. His eyes are on the sides of his head. They were at the front. Laboon couldn't see them. It was Luffy who shot the cannon, which did end up saving their whole ship. It just didn't slow them down in time to save his special seat. But that's not necessarily Laboon's fault either. Laboon didn't know anything. Laboon is an animal, even if he is said to have a human heart by Crocus. So I don't know that he necessarily had to punch Laboon in the eye and then climb on his head to continue punching him. Like, I don't think that was necessary. I think he should have just accepted the loss of the special seat. And as we know from future, it's a pretty easy fix. They're just going to reattach it. So I think he did overreact a bit. Again, the little bit of cruelty with punching him in the eye and the cannon into Laboon were a little bit cruel, but again, it didn't really hurt him. Um, I don't think the whale hunting of Mr. Nine and Miss Wednesday is good either, but at the same time, again, I don't have a problem with hunting for resources. Hunting for sport, different story. Then you're just killing to kill, and that is pretty terrible. But if you are hunting for the purpose of utilizing the resources that are within the body of the animal, whether that's the meat, the leather, if it's a whale, like the oil and bones, cartilage, etc. Like if you were going to use that animal and the resources within that animal, I have no problem with hunting at all. So that didn't necessarily bother me because they did indicate it was for food, and not only that, it would be food enough to feed their entire town for 2 to 3 years. But because we learned that Laboon has a human heart, then you just start to feel a little bit bad for Laboon that people are trying to hunt him for food. And then there was a little bit of comedy when the ship first goes into the stomach of being surprised that like the stomach's painted like a sky and that there's like this little island floating in there. And then Crocus, of course, comes out, hunts a giant squid, and then sits down, starts reading a newspaper without saying anything to them. And there is a comedic bit that they do multiple times for this, but it was a little bit slow with that because they were kind of trying to keep Crocus mysterious, so they did take a bit of time to get there. And as much as I like to think I still have a pretty good attention span, um, sometimes when things are a little bit slower than I would like, I do find them a bit boring, and that kind of happened here. But ultimately, I did think that it is a good episode. They did pack a lot of information into it. There was some comedy and some action as well, and I was entertained throughout most of it. So I did give it an 8 out of 10, agreeing with mostly objective in this case, though maybe for different reasons. And because, of course, it is the only episode in this arc so far that we have ranked, it is in first. The first obstacle, Giant Whale Laboon, appears. And that now brings us to our saga ranking so far. And we have our Reverse Mountain arc with a score on both the personal and objective of 8 out of 20 so far. And then finally, the series ranking, where we'll be ranking each of the arcs against each other. And East Blue Saga ended with 56.25 on the mostly objective and 52.5 on the personal ranking. And Arabasta Saga, because we have not finished the first arc yet, has no score. But with that, we have now rewatched and ranked One Piece, Arabasta Saga Reverse Mountain Arc, Episode 62, The First Obstacle, Giant Whale Laboon appears. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.